The Oakwood Plaza shopping center had a reputation for being family-friendly, until that morning when hatred and ignorance turned a simple grocery trip into a nightmare. No one had ever been denied access. No one had faced discrimination. No. Until Emily Wilson decided my disabled son's wheelchair was taking up too much space in the store aisle. When she pulled out that pepper spray, she didn't just attack my child, she unleashed a battle that would expose a deeper rot in our community and change Riverside Heights forever. Quick pause before we continue. If you're enjoying the story, make sure to hit subscribe because tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. Dawn painted long shadows across the Oakwood Plaza parking lot as I, Lisa Anderson, carefully helped my 12-year-old son, Max, out of our modified van. The morning air carried the crisp scent of autumn leaves, mixing with the familiar aroma of fresh bread from the plaza's bakery. Max's movements were cheerful as I unfolded his wheelchair, each motion carrying the practiced efficiency of a routine we'd perfected over years. "Morning, Lisa," Emily Chen called out, hurrying over from her car. Our neighbor and Max's favorite teacher had become a familiar face during our morning shopping runs. "Need any help?" "We're good," I smiled, watching Max expertly maneuver his chair. My heart swelled with pride at his independence, hard-won through years of physical therapy. Emily's presence was always welcome. She'd been there through Max's toughest days after the accident that took his ability to walk. "Those new wheels working out?" Emily asked Max, falling into step beside us as we headed toward Thompson's grocery. "They're awesome," Max beamed, demonstrating a smooth turn. "Way better for corners." Robert Thompson, the store manager, held the door open as we approached. "Morning, Max. Got those special cereals you like in stock finally." Over the past 3 years, Robert had modified his store to be more accessible, even installing wider aisles after seeing Max struggle in his early days with the wheelchair. The morning shopping trip was our special time. Max had always loved helping pick out groceries, and I'd made sure his disability never stopped that joy. We moved through the familiar aisles, Max proudly reaching items from his level, while I handled the higher shelves. "Mom, can we get the chocolate milk?" Max asked, his wheelchair smoothly navigating the dairy section. "I did great on that math test yesterday." "You sure did, buddy." I reached for the milk, but a sharp voice cut through our moment. "Excuse me, but this is ridiculous." I turned to see a well-dressed woman, probably in her 40s, glaring at us, her designer purse clutched tight, lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "That wheelchair is taking up the entire aisle," she continued, voice rising. "Some of us have actual shopping to do." Max's shoulders tensed. I knew that look. 3 years of therapy had helped him deal with stares and comments, but direct confrontation still hit hard. "Ma'am," I kept my voice calm, "there's plenty of room to pass. We're just getting our groceries like everyone else." "Like everyone else?" Emily Wilson, I'd later learn her name, scoffed. "Normal people don't block the entire store with their equipment. This is a shopping center, not a hospital." The slur against disabled people she used next made Max flinch. 3 years of protecting my son had taught me to recognize dangerous situations, but nothing had prepared me for what happened next. I said, "Move." Wilson reached into her designer purse. The pepper spray canister emerged before I could react. "Hey!" Robert Thompson's voice carried from the end of the aisle, but it was too late. The spray hit Max directly in the face. My son's scream of pain shattered the morning quiet. Emily Chen rushed forward as I dropped to Max's level, but Wilson was already backing away, her face a mask of self-righteous satisfaction. "He was threatening me," she announced to the gathering crowd. "I felt endangered. You all saw it." Through my rage and focus on helping Max, my mind registered crucial details. The calculated way she'd positioned herself, the practiced motion with the pepper spray, the immediate justification. This wasn't a random incident of ignorance. This was someone who'd done this before. "Call 911, Robert shouted, but I heard Emily already on the phone. Max was crying, his hands covering his face, and my heart broke even as my mind shifted into the analytical mode I'd developed through years of advocating for disability rights. "Security cameras," I managed through clenched teeth, still helping. "Max, get the footage now." Unknown to Wilson, who was still spouting justifications to anyone who'd listen, Thompson's Grocery had installed a state-of-the-art security system just last month. Every angle of that aisle would be recorded in perfect clarity. Officer David Miller arrived within minutes, but Wilson had already called someone. Her voice carried from outside, speaking about these people and taking over our nice neighborhoods. "Lisa," Emily whispered as the paramedics checked. "Max, this isn't the first time. I've heard about her at other stores, other incidents with disabled people. Nobody's ever pressed charges." That fact settled into my gut like cold steel. 3 years of fighting for Max's rights, of building a supportive community, of showing him that his disability didn't define him, and now this woman had attacked him for simply existing in public space. As I watched Max being treated, my mind was already calculating. The security footage, the witnesses, the pattern of behavior Emily mentioned, pieces of a larger picture forming. Wilson didn't know it yet, but her attack on my son was about to expose something much bigger than one incident of discrimination. If you've been moved by this story so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button. The next part reveals how this confrontation unleashed a chain of events that would change not just our community, but disability rights across the state. You won't want to miss it. Max's eyes were still red and swollen as we left the store, but his spirit, the incredible strength I'd watched him develop through years of challenges, remained unbroken. "Mom," he whispered as I helped him into our van, "we're not going to let her stop us from shopping here, right? Nobody," I promised, my voice firm. "We're not letting anyone stop us ever again." Wilson had chosen the wrong target. She thought she'd intimidated a disabled child and his mother. Instead, she'd just started a war that would expose a pattern of discrimination that had gone unchecked for far too long in Riverside Heights. The real battle was just beginning, and some people were about to learn why you never underestimate a mother protecting her child. The evening after the pepper spray attack found me sitting at our kitchen table, surrounded by papers and my laptop, while Max rested in his room. Dr. Sarah Martinez had checked him thoroughly, confirming no permanent damage to his eyes, but the emotional wounds would take longer to heal. "Lisa," Emily Chen's voice carried concern as she set down another cup of coffee. She'd stayed to help, her teacher's organizational skills proving invaluable as we documented everything. "There's something you need to see." She turned her laptop toward me, showing social media posts from various community groups. Emily Wilson had already started spinning her version of events, claiming she'd been threatened by an aggressive wheelchair user who was taking advantage of disability laws. "The comments," Emily pointed, her finger tracing down the screen. "Look how many people are supporting her." I felt my jaw clench as I read. Multiple accounts described similar encounters with Wilson at other locations: the library, the community center, even the local park. Each time she'd confronted disabled individuals or their caregivers about taking up too much space or inconveniencing normal people. "Keep scrolling," Emily urged softly. My heart sank as more posts appeared. Wilson wasn't alone. There was an entire group of self-proclaimed community advocates who'd been systematically harassing disabled residents of Riverside Heights. They masked their discrimination behind concerns about property values and community standards. Officer David Miller chose that moment to arrive, carrying a thick folder. "Lisa," he greeted me, his expression grim. "We've got the security footage from Thompson's, but there's more." He spread photos across my table, showing Wilson at different locations across town. The timestamps revealed a pattern. She specifically targeted times when disabled residents typically visited these places. "This wasn't random," I said quietly, my mind connecting dots. "She knew Max and I shopped there every Tuesday morning. She was waiting." "There's worse," David confirmed. "Remember that community center renovation project that got shut down last year? The one that would have added wheelchair ramps and accessible bathrooms?" Emily's eyes widened. "Wilson was on that committee. Not just on it," David revealed. "She led the opposition, used her connections with the city council to block the funding." My phone buzzed with a text from Robert Thompson. The store manager had been reviewing older security footage, finding multiple instances of Wilson following disabled customers, documenting their movements, taking photos. "Lisa," Grace Sullivan's voice preceded the disability rights advocate. As she hurried through my front door, "You need to see this." She placed a stack of documents on the table, public records of property complaints, zoning challenges, and blocked permits, all targeted at facilities or businesses trying to become more accessible.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"It's organized," Grace explained, her voice tight with anger. "Wilson and her friends have been systematically fighting against disability accommodations across town. They use social media to coordinate, pressure businesses, and intimidate families. Through my window, I noticed more cars arriving. Amy Brooks, another parent of a disabled child, emerged with her daughter. Behind her, Steve Murphy, the security camera expert who'd helped Thompson's upgrade their system, carried equipment cases. "They picked the wrong target," Emily said quietly, watching the gathering support. Indeed, Wilson didn't know that for 3 years I'd been quietly building my own network. After Max's accident, as I fought for his rights and dignity, I'd connected with other parents, advocates, and allies. We'd shared resources, documented discrimination, and prepared for exactly this kind of fight. "Mom?" Max's voice called from his room. "Can Emily come read with me for a bit?" As Emily headed to comfort my son, I studied the evidence spreading. Across my table, Wilson thought she'd intimidated a disabled child and his mother. Instead, she'd exposed a network of discrimination that had been operating in shadows for years. My doorbell rang again. Jack Parker, the community center director, entered with more documents. "Remember how our accessibility renovation got blocked? Look at the real estate holdings of the people who opposed it." The pattern was clear. Wilson and her associates had financial interests in maintaining what they called traditional community standards. Their discrimination wasn't just prejudice, it was profit-driven. "Lisa," Officer Miller spoke carefully, "this is bigger than one incident of assault. What we're seeing here, it's systematic civil rights violations. We've been documenting everything," Grace added. "Every blocked permit, every harassed family, every discriminatory action. We just needed a clear case to expose it all." My phone buzzed again. Mike O'Connor, the local news reporter, had caught wind of the story. His text was clear: "Ready when you are. This needs to be told." Subscribe to see what happens next, because Wilson's attack on Max wasn't just going to expose discrimination in Riverside Heights. It was about to reveal how a network of prejudice had been quietly working to exclude disabled residents from their own community. As night fell, more supporters gathered at my home. Carol Foster, the school principal, arrived with records of other incidents. Mark Reynolds, a sympathetic city council member, brought zoning documents showing how accessibility requirements had been systematically undermined. "Look at this," Steve Murphy called out, his laptop displaying security footage from multiple locations. He'd enhanced the videos, showing Wilson's group conducting what appeared to be organized surveillance of disabled residents. They've been tracking patterns, Amy Brooks realized, her voice shaking. When we shop, when we visit parks, when we attend community events, they've been planning these confrontations. Laura Phillips, a social media activist, was already organizing online support. People are sharing similar stories from all over town. Wilson's group has been doing this for years, but nobody could prove the connection. Ben Warren, the young store employee who'd witnessed the attack, arrived with more surveillance footage. Mr. Thompson asked me to bring this. It shows Wilson meeting with others in the parking lot before she came in. This was planned. My mind raced through implications while I checked on Max. My son had fallen asleep, Emily still by his side, a book open on his lap. His face was peaceful now, but I couldn't forget his scream of pain, his confusion at being attacked simply for existing in public space. Lisa, Jessica White, a local attorney who'd arrived with Grace, spoke quietly. What happened to Max? It's horrible, but it might be exactly what we needed to expose all of this. She was right. For years, Wilson's group had operated carefully, keeping each incident isolated, making victims feel alone. But they'd made a crucial mistake with Max. They'd attacked the son of someone who'd spent 3 years building a network of supporters, documenting discrimination, and preparing for exactly this kind of fight. They think they're dealing with one angry mother, Grace observed, watching me study the evidence. They have no idea what's coming. No, they didn't. Wilson's pepper spray attack wasn't just going to be another isolated incident. It was going to be the key that exposed years of organized discrimination, systematic civil rights violations, and the network of people who'd profited from keeping disabled residents excluded from their own community. If you're moved by this story, hit subscribe, because tomorrow you'll see how a community came together to fight back against discrimination, and how one mother's fight for justice exposed a network of prejudice that had gone unchecked for far too long. The pieces were falling into place, the evidence mounting, and Wilson's group was about to learn that sometimes the biggest mistakes aren't the crimes you commit. It's underestimating those you choose to attack. The battle for justice was just beginning, and Riverside Heights would never be the same. The morning after the attack brought a flurry of activity that would change Riverside Heights forever. I walked into Thompson's grocery, not to shop this time, but to meet with Robert and review additional security footage. Max was safe at home with Emily Chen, who'd taken a personal day to help him recover. "You need to see this," Robert said, leading me to his office. The security monitors showed multiple angles of yesterday's incident, but more importantly, they revealed something we hadn't noticed in the chaos. Watch the background. The footage showed Wilson making several phone calls before the attack, her body language suggesting planned coordination. More disturbing were the 2 other people filming discreetly from different aisles, as if documenting the confrontation for some purpose. "There's more," Robert continued, switching to footage from previous weeks. "They've been studying your routine. Look at these timestamps." My stomach turned as I watched. Every Tuesday morning for the past month, Wilson or her associates had been in the store during our shopping time, watching, taking notes, seemingly planning. Officer David Miller arrived as we reviewed the footage. "Lisa, our tech team enhanced the audio from yesterday. Wilson was wearing a wireless earpiece. She was getting instructions from someone." "Instructions?" I felt my anger rising. "You mean this wasn't just her?" "This gets bigger," David confirmed grimly. "We've linked her phone calls to 3 different local real estate developers, the same ones who've been fighting against accessibility modifications across town." Grace Sullivan burst into the office, clutching her laptop. "Lisa, you won't believe what we found." Remember those blocked community center renovations? The companies that bought the surrounding properties right after? They're all connected to Wilson's husband's investment firm. The pieces started falling into place. This wasn't just random discrimination. It was organized, financially motivated exclusion. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica White, our attorney. Meeting in 30 minutes. Bring everything. Media's involved now. As we drove to Jessica's office, I noticed we were being followed. 2 cars back, a black SUV maintained consistent distance. David, I spoke quietly to Officer Miller, who was driving. We've got company. Notice them, he replied calmly. Don't worry, we're documenting everything now. Jessica's office was already crowded when we arrived. Mike O'Connor from the local news was there, along with Grace, Amy Brooks, and several other parents of disabled children. But the most surprising presence was Karen Taylor, a former member of Wilson's social circle. I can't stay quiet anymore, Karen announced as we settled in. What happened to Max? It was planned. They've been targeting families with disabled children for months. It's part of a larger strategy to drive down property values in accessible neighborhoods, then buy them cheap for redevelopment. Mike O'Connor leaned forward, recorder running. You have proof of this. Karen pulled out her phone, showing us a private social media group. The content made my blood boil. Wilson and her associates had been sharing photos of disabled residents, tracking their routines, planning confrontations designed to make them feel unwelcome. They call it community preservation, Karen explained, her voice shaking. But it's really about forcing disabled residents out so their investment properties increase in value. Jessica White spread documents across her conference table. We've got enough for a civil rights lawsuit, but there's something bigger here. Systematic discrimination for financial gain. That's federal territory. And we've got more, Grace added, pulling up property records. Every time they've successfully driven disabled residents out of a neighborhood, Wilson's husband's firm moves in. They've been flipping entire blocks, marketing them as traditional lifestyle communities. My phone buzzed again. Steve. Murphy had finished analyzing Wilson's social media history. The pattern was devastating. For 2 years, she'd been coordinating with real estate investors, targeting neighborhoods with high concentrations of disabled residents. Lisa? Officer. Miller spoke urgently. We need to move fast. They're already trying to spin the pepper spray incident. Wilson's claiming she felt threatened, and her friends are flooding social media with support. Let them, I replied, my voice steady. Every post, every comment, every attempt to justify what they did to Max. It's just more evidence of their organized discrimination. Jack Parker burst in, holding more documents. The community center renovation wasn't just blocked, it was sabotaged. Someone deliberately damaged the accessibility survey reports, made it look like modifications would be structurally impossible. Subscribe to see what happens next, because this story isn't just about one attack anymore. It's about exposing a network of discrimination that's been profiting from excluding disabled people from their own community. Laura Phillips, monitoring social media, reported growing support for our side. Other families were coming forward with similar stories. Wilson's group had terrorized disabled residents across 3 counties, always using the same tactics: harassment, intimidation, and carefully staged confrontations. They're organized, Jessica observed, studying the evidence, but they made 3 crucial mistakes. First, they attacked a child. Second, they did it on camera. And third, she looked at me with a slight smile, they picked the wrong mother to mess with. My phone buzzed with another update. Ben Warren had found more footage. Wilson's group had been using the store's parking lot for regular meetings, planning their campaign of harassment from right under our noses. Lisa, Emily Chen called, patching in through video chat from my house. Max wants to say something to everyone. My son's face appeared on the laptop screen, still showing signs of the pepper spray attack, but his spirit unbroken. Mom, he said clearly, tell them I want to help. I want to speak up. They can't keep hurting people like me." The room fell silent, moved by Max's courage. Then Karen Taylor stood up. "I'll testify," she declared, "about everything. The meetings, the planning, the real estate connections, all of it." Mike O'Connor was already writing. "This isn't just local news anymore," he said. "This is about exposing systematic discrimination across the entire region." "And we've got them," Jessica added confidently. The pepper spray attack wasn't just assault, it was a civil rights violation committed as part of an organized campaign of discrimination for financial gain. That's federal charges territory. Through the office window, I noticed more black SUVs arriving. Wilson's group was realizing the danger they were in. Their carefully constructed campaign of discrimination was about to be exposed. "They'll try to destroy evidence," Officer Miller warned. "Too late," Grace replied, holding up a flash drive. "We've got everything, every meeting, every plan, every financial connection. They can't bury this anymore." The next few hours would be crucial. Wilson's group had spent years building their network of discrimination, hiding behind claims of community preservation while profiting from the exclusion of disabled residents. They thought attacking Max would be just another successful intimidation. Instead, they'd triggered an investigation that would expose everything they'd worked so hard to hide. Because sometimes the biggest mistake isn't the crime you commit, it's underestimating those you choose to attack. The battle for justice was entering its next phase, and Riverside Heights was about to learn why you never underestimate a mother fighting for her child's rights. Evening settled over Riverside Heights as our team gathered at Jessica White's law office, reviewing the mounting evidence against Wilson's group. The atmosphere was tense. We'd discovered our investigation had rattled some powerful people. "Another threat came in," Grace Sullivan announced, holding up her phone. "Wilson's husband's firm is threatening to sue for defamation. Says we're damaging their community investment initiatives." "Let them," Jessica replied, spreading new documents across her conference table. "Every legal threat just gives us more evidence of their connection to this discrimination campaign." My phone buzzed with an urgent text from Emily Chen. "Lisa, you need to see this. Wilson's at the school board meeting right now. She's trying to block the new accessibility modifications." "She's getting desperate," Officer Miller observed, watching the school board's live stream on his laptop. "Look at her body language. She knows we're close to exposing everything." Through the office windows, I noticed more unmarked vehicles circling the block. Wilson's group was having us watched, but they didn't realize we'd anticipated this. Steve Murphy's security cameras were documenting every surveillance attempt, building our case stronger by the hour. "Lisa," Mike O'Connor called urgently from his corner. "Just got word from my editor. Wilson's group isn't just operating here. They've got similar operations in 5 other counties, always the same pattern: harass disabled residents, drive down property values, buy up neighborhoods cheap." Dr. Sarah Martinez arrived with medical records from other families. "It's not just Max," she reported grimly. "I've documented 15 cases of disabled residents suffering anxiety attacks, depression, and physical symptoms after encounters with Wilson's group. They're literally making people sick with their harassment." My phone lit up with another text, this time from Robert Thompson. "They're trying to pressure my suppliers, threatening to boycott any business that supports accessible shopping." "Perfect," Jessica smiled. "More evidence of organized discrimination. They're practically building our case for us." Karen Taylor, who'd been monitoring the private social media groups, suddenly sat up straight. "They're planning something big. Wilson just called an emergency meeting at her house, says they need to protect their community investments." Quick pause. If you're following this story, hit subscribe because tomorrow's update reveals just how deep this discrimination network really goes, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Got it? Officer Miller announced, reviewing surveillance footage. Wilson's group is gathering at her house, but look who's arriving. Real estate developers, city officials, even that contractor who mysteriously declared the community center structurally unsuitable for accessibility modifications. Through my earpiece, Steve Murphy reported movement around town. Wilson's associates were visiting businesses, making threats, trying to maintain their grip on the community through intimidation. They're scared, Grace observed, watching the surveillance feeds. Look how they're scrambling to cover their tracks. But it's too late. We've got everything documented. Amy Brooks burst in with new information. The school board meeting, Wilson just tried to claim that accessible facilities would decrease educational quality. But guess what? Karen Taylor recorded her admitting it was about property values in the parking lot. The evidence was mounting by the minute. What had started as an investigation into one pepper spray attack was exposing years of systematic discrimination, all carefully orchestrated for financial gain. "Lisa," Jack Parker called from the community center, "you won't believe this. Remember those structural problems that blocked our accessibility renovations? Just found proof they were fabricated. The contractor who declared our building unsuitable, he's Wilson's brother-in-law." Laura Phillips, monitoring social media, reported a shift in public sentiment. As more evidence emerged, Wilson's supporters were becoming her accusers. Other families were coming forward with similar stories of harassment and intimidation. "They're trying to delete everything," Steve Murphy reported through the comm system. "Social media posts, emails, meeting records. They're in full panic mode." "Too late," Jessica smiled, holding up a thick folder. "We've got it all. Every deleted post, every threatening email, every financial connection. They can run, but they can't hide anymore." My phone buzzed with a message from Emily. Max wanted to know how things were going. His courage through all this had been remarkable. Even after being pepper sprayed, he was more concerned about helping other disabled kids than about himself. "Tell him we're winning," I replied, watching Wilson's carefully constructed network of discrimination crumble in real time. Mark Reynolds, the city council member, arrived with more damning evidence. "Just found records of Wilson's husband's firm buying properties right after disabled residents were harassed out of neighborhoods. They weren't just discriminating, they were profiting from it." Through the office windows, we could see more supporters gathering. The community was rallying, not just for Max, but for every disabled person who'd been targeted by Wilson's group. "Federal investigators want everything we've got," Officer Miller announced. "This isn't just local anymore. They're treating it as an organized campaign of civil rights violations." Just then, my phone buzzed with an alert from our surveillance system. Wilson's group was mobilizing, visiting businesses, making threats, trying to maintain control through fear. "Let them," Grace said firmly. "Every threat, every act of intimidation, it's just more evidence of their organized discrimination." "Lisa," Jessica called, reviewing new documents, "you need to see this. Wilson's group didn't just target disabled residents. They've been manipulating property values, blocking accessibility improvements, and profiting from discrimination across 3 states. The pieces were falling into place faster than we'd expected. What had started as one mother's fight for justice was exposing a network of discrimination that had operated unchecked for years." "They're running scared," Officer Miller observed, watching the surveillance feeds. "Look how they're scrambling to cover their tracks, but it's too late. We've got everything." Through my earpiece, Steve Murphy reported more movement around town. Wilson's associates were visiting their usual meeting spots, desperately trying to destroy evidence we'd already documented. "This is bigger than we thought," Mike O'Connor said quietly, reviewing his notes. "It's not just about discrimination anymore. It's about systematic civil rights violations for profit." As night fell over Riverside Heights, our evidence mounted higher. Wilson's attack on Max hadn't just exposed one incident of discrimination. It had revealed an entire network of prejudice and profit that had been operating in shadows for years. The battle for justice was entering its most crucial phase. Wilson's group thought they were fighting one mother's complaint about pepper spray. Instead, they were about to face the consequences of years of organized discrimination. Because sometimes the biggest mistake isn't the crime you commit. It's underestimating those you choose to target. Wilson was about to learn why you never attack a child whose mother has spent years preparing to expose discrimination. The real fight was just beginning, and Riverside Heights would never be the same. Night turned into early morning as Emily Wilson's network started to unravel. Text messages poured in from across Riverside Heights, businesses receiving threats, families being intimidated, and Wilson's associates scrambling to contain the damage. "Lisa," Officer Miller called urgently. "We've got movement at Wilson's house. Multiple vehicles leaving. Looks like they're trying to move documents." Through our surveillance network, we watched as expensive cars pulled away from Wilson's driveway, their occupants clearly in a hurry. But what they didn't know was that Steve Murphy's cameras had caught everything. "Got them," Steve reported through the comm system. "They're heading to their law firm, probably trying to destroy evidence before federal investigators arrive." Grace Sullivan burst into Jessica's office, her laptop displaying property records. "You won't believe what we just found." Every time Wilson's group successfully drove out disabled residents, their shell companies bought the properties within days. They weren't just discriminating, they were orchestrating a real estate scheme. Quick pause. If you're invested in this story, hit subscribe because tomorrow's update reveals exactly how deep this discrimination network goes. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. More families are coming forward. Dr. Martinez announced, reviewing her medical files. "I've documented over 20 cases now of disabled residents who were systematically harassed. The pattern is always the same: intimidation, property damage, and then coincidental offers to buy their homes at below-market prices." My phone buzzed with an urgent message from Robert Thompson. "They're trying to organize a boycott of accessible businesses. But it's backfiring. The community is rallying behind us instead." Karen Taylor, still monitoring the private social media groups, suddenly sat up straight. "They're panicking. Wilson just posted in their private group. She's calling for an emergency meeting at their lawyer's office. Says they need to protect their investments at all costs." Through the office windows, I noticed more vehicles arriving. But these weren't Wilson's associates. They were community members coming to show support. The plaza outside was filling with families, many with disabled children, all united against discrimination. "Lisa," Mike O'Connor called from his desk, "national media is picking up the story. This isn't just about one pepper spray attack anymore. It's exposing systematic discrimination across multiple states." Jessica White spread new documents across her conference table. "Look at these property records. Every time Wilson's group blocked an accessibility improvement, their investment firm bought nearby properties. They were literally profiting from discrimination." Amy Brooks rushed in with her laptop. The school board meeting recordings just leaked. Wilson's on tape admitting they target neighborhoods with disabled residents because it's easier to influence property values. Officer Miller's radio crackled with updates. Police units were monitoring Wilson's associates as they moved around town, documenting every attempt to cover their tracks. "They're getting sloppy," Grace observed, reviewing surveillance footage. "Look how they're rushing to hide evidence, but we've already got copies of everything." My phone lit up with a text from Emily Chen. "Max wants you to know he's proud of what we're doing. Says if his getting pepper sprayed helps other disabled kids, then something good came from it. Laura Phillips reported a surge in social media support. The hashtag #JusticeForMax was trending, with thousands sharing similar stories of discrimination and harassment. Federal investigators are on their way, Officer Miller announced. They're treating this as an organized civil rights conspiracy. Wilson's group isn't just facing local charges anymore. Jack Parker arrived with more community center documents. Found proof they deliberately sabotaged our accessibility survey. They hired an inspector who falsified reports to block improvements. Through our surveillance feeds, we watched Wilson's network crumbling. Their carefully constructed facade of community preservation was being exposed for what it really was: organized discrimination for profit. Lisa, Jessica called urgently. You need to see this. Wilson's firm didn't just target disabled residents here. They've done this in 12 other communities. Always the same pattern: harass vulnerable residents, drive down property values, buy cheap, redevelop without accessibility features. Mark Reynolds burst in with city council documents. Just found records of Wilson's husband's firm submitting development plans before they even started harassing residents. They were planning this for months. Steve Murphy's voice came through. The comm system. They're trying to access their secure servers remotely, attempting to delete evidence we've already copied. The pieces were falling into place faster than we'd anticipated. Wilson's attack on Max hadn't just exposed one incident of discrimination, it had revealed an entire network of organized civil rights violations. They're threatening witnesses now, Officer Miller reported, monitoring police channels, trying to silence anyone who might testify about their discrimination campaign. Let them, Jessica replied confidently. Every threat is just more evidence of their organized conspiracy. They're building our case for us. Through the office windows, we could see Wilson's associates becoming more desperate. They were visiting businesses, making threats, trying to maintain control through intimidation. Lisa, Grace called urgently. Federal investigators want to know about the pattern of harassment, how they targeted specific families, how they coordinated their discrimination campaign. My phone buzzed with another update from Steve Murphy. Found their financial records. Every time they successfully drove out disabled residents, their property values dropped by exactly the percentage they needed for their development plans. The evidence was mounting by the minute. What had started as an investigation into one pepper spray attack was exposing years of systematic discrimination, all carefully orchestrated for financial gain. They're running scared, Officer Miller observed, watching the surveillance feeds. Look how they're scrambling to cover their tracks. But it's too late. We've got everything documented. As morning approached, our evidence had become overwhelming. Wilson's network of discrimination was being exposed not just locally, but nationally. Their carefully constructed campaign of harassment and intimidation was crumbling under the weight of their own documented actions. The battle for justice was entering its final phase. Wilson's group had thought they were untouchable, protected by their connections and their carefully maintained facade of community concerns. Instead, they were about to learn why you never underestimate a mother fighting for justice. Because sometimes the biggest mistake isn't the crime you commit. It's choosing the wrong target for your discrimination. The real fight was about to begin, and Riverside Heights would never be the same. The morning sun rose over Riverside Heights as Wilson's carefully constructed network began to implode. I stood in Jessica White's office, watching multiple surveillance feeds as our evidence sparked a chain reaction none of us had anticipated. Lisa, Officer Miller called urgently. Wilson's husband just arrived at their investment firm. They're shredding documents, but our team was ready. Every page is being photographed by the cleaning crew we placed there last week. Through our security network, we watched chaos unfold at multiple locations. Wilson's associates were frantically trying to destroy evidence, not realizing we'd already documented everything. If you're following this story, hit subscribe now, because tomorrow's update reveals the shocking truth about how deep this discrimination network really goes. "Got something big," Grace Sullivan announced, bursting through the door. "Remember those accessibility modifications Wilson blocked? At the shopping center, just found emails proving they plan to buy the entire plaza once property values dropped. They were creating their own buying opportunities through discrimination." My phone buzzed with updates from Steve Murphy. "Their security system just went dark. They're trying to wipe servers, but we've already mirrored everything. Years of discriminatory practices, all documented. Dr. Martinez arrived with more medical records. The pattern is clear now. Every time Wilson's group targeted a neighborhood, we saw increased emergency room visits from disabled residents. Anxiety attacks, stress-related complications. They were literally making people sick. They're panicking," Karen Taylor reported, monitoring their private communications. "Wilson just called an emergency meeting at their lawyer's office. But here's the interesting part. Some of their own members are turning against them. Through the office windows, we could see more supporters gathering. The community had transformed overnight from silent witnesses to active participants in exposing discrimination." "Lisa," Mike O'Connor called from his desk. "National Civil Rights organizations are getting involved. They're saying this case could set precedents for fighting discrimination nationwide." Robert Thompson's text brought more evidence. "Found their old planning documents in our store's archive. They've been mapping disabled residents' shopping patterns for months, coordinating harassment campaigns." Jessica White spread new files across her desk. "Federal investigators just arrived. They're treating this as an organized conspiracy to violate civil rights for financial gain. The penalties could be massive." Amy Brooks rushed in with her laptop. "School board recordings just leaked. Wilson's on tape discussing how to make schools less attractive to families with disabled children. She called it market optimization." Officer Miller's radio crackled with updates. Police units were tracking Wilson's associates as they moved between locations, documenting every attempt to cover their tracks. "They're getting desperate," Grace observed, reviewing surveillance footage. "Look how they're trying to contact. They're allies, but no one wants to be associated with them now." My phone lit up with a message from Emily Chen. "Max is asking when he can go back to school. Says he wants to show everyone that bullies can't win." Laura Phillips reported an explosion of social media support. Our evidence was going viral, with similar stories emerging from other communities across the state. "Federal task force is expanding their investigation," Officer Miller announced. "They've found links to discriminatory practices in 3 states. This is becoming a major civil rights case." Jack Parker arrived with community center blueprints, found proof they deliberately sabotaged our accessibility plans. The contractor admitted everything, said Wilson's group paid him to declare the modifications structurally impossible. Through our surveillance network, we watched Wilson's operation collapse. Years of carefully planned discrimination were being exposed in real time. "Lisa," Jessica called urgently, "you need to see these financial records. Every time they blocked an accessibility improvement, their investment firm bought nearby properties. Within days, the correlation is perfect." Mark Reynolds burst in with city council documents. They didn't just target individuals. They had a systematic plan to reshape entire neighborhoods. Always started with harassing disabled residents. Steve Murphy's voice came through our secure channel. "Their IT team is in full panic mode. They're trying to encrypt everything, but we've already got copies. Years of discriminatory practices, all documented." The evidence was becoming overwhelming. What started as one mother's fight for justice after a pepper spray attack had exposed an entire network of organized discrimination. "Lisa," Grace called quietly. Federal investigators want to talk about Max's case. They're saying it could be the key to bringing down similar operations nationwide. My phone buzzed with updates. From Karen Taylor. Wilson's trying to call another emergency meeting, but half her group isn't showing up. They're abandoning her. Through the office windows, we could see more community members arriving. What began as a small group of supporters had grown into a movement. They're threatening legal action now, Officer Miller reported. Trying to silence witnesses with lawsuits. Let them, Jessica smiled. Every threat just proves the organized nature of their discrimination. They're building our case for us. As morning turned to afternoon, our evidence continued mounting. Wilson's network wasn't just crumbling, it was exposing similar operations across the country. Lisa, Mike O'Connor called. National News wants to interview Max. They're saying his story could help expose discrimination everywhere. Through our surveillance feeds, we watched Wilson's associates becoming increasingly desperate. They were visiting banks, law firms, trying to protect their assets. Too late, Grace observed. Every financial transaction is just more evidence of their organized discrimination. The battle for justice had reached its critical phase. Wilson's group had thought they were untouchable, protected by their money and connections. Instead, they were about to learn why you never underestimate a mother fighting for her child's rights, because sometimes the biggest mistake isn't the crime you commit. It's choosing to attack someone who's been quietly preparing to expose your entire operation. The real fight was about to begin, and Riverside Heights would never be the same. The community had awakened, and discrimination would no longer hide in shadows. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon against prejudice isn't force or fury, it's exposure. And Wilson was about to learn just how brightly the light of truth can shine. The afternoon brought a turning point none of us had expected. As I stood in Jessica White's office reviewing evidence, multiple alerts hit our surveillance system simultaneously. Wilson's network wasn't just crumbling, it was imploding spectacularly. Lisa, Officer Miller called urgently. Wilson's husband just turned himself in. Says he wants to make a deal before the federal investigation gets worse. Quick pause. If you're following this story, hit subscribe now because tomorrow's update reveals exactly how this discrimination network falls apart, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Through our security feeds, we watched as Wilson's carefully constructed world collapsed. Her husband's investment firm was in chaos, employees rushing to cooperate with authorities. Grace Sullivan burst through the door, laptop in hand. You won't believe what just leaked. Internal emails from Wilson's group. They had a 5-year plan to systematically drive disabled residents out of 12 neighborhoods. They called it community optimization. My phone buzzed with updates from Steve Murphy. Their entire server just went public. Someone inside their organization dumped everything. Meeting minutes, financial records, harassment plans. It's all out there. Now, Dr. Martinez arrived with more shocking evidence. Remember those anxiety attacks disabled residents were having? Found proof Wilson's group was deliberately triggering them. They studied people's medical conditions to maximize psychological pressure. It's falling apart, Karen Taylor reported, still monitoring their private channels. Wilson's own team is turning against her. They're all rushing to make deals with federal investigators. Through the office windows, we could see news vans arriving. What started as a local story about pepper spray had become national news about systematic discrimination. Lisa, Mike O'Connor called from his corner, every major network wants to cover this. They're calling it the biggest disability rights case in decades. Robert Thompson's text brought more revelations. Their real estate records just went public. Every property they bought after harassing disabled residents. The paper trail is clear as day. Jessica White spread new documents across her desk. Federal agents just seized their financial records. The pattern is undeniable. They profited millions from discriminating against disabled residents. Amy Brooks rushed in with her laptop. School board just voted unanimously to release all records of Wilson's involvement. The things she said in private meetings. It's horrifying. Officer Miller's radio crackled with updates. Police units were responding to multiple locations as Wilson's associates tried desperately to destroy evidence. Too late, Grace observed. Watching the feeds, everything they're trying to shred, we already have copies. Every discriminatory action, every financial transaction, all documented. My phone lit up with a message from Emily Chen. Max wants to know if he can speak at the next city council meeting. Says other kids need to know they can stand up to bullies. Laura Phillips reported an unprecedented wave of social media support. Justice for Max had become justice for all, with thousands sharing similar stories of discrimination. Federal task force just expanded, Officer Miller announced. They're treating this as a RICO case now. Organized discrimination for financial gain across state lines. Jack Parker arrived with more community center evidence. Found recordings of Wilson's team planning to buy properties around every blocked accessibility project. They created the problems they profited from. Through our surveillance network, we watched as federal agents arrived at multiple locations. Wilson's operation wasn't just being exposed, it was being dismantled. Lisa, Jessica called urgently. Wilson's husband is naming names. High-level officials, business leaders, everyone involved in their discrimination network. Mark Reynolds burst in with city documents. Every development project they pushed through, it was all part of a systematic plan to exclude disabled residents. The evidence is overwhelming. Steve Murphy's voice came through our secure channel. Their entire communication network just went dark. But we've got everything. Years of discriminatory plans, all preserved. The evidence wasn't just mounting, it was avalanching. What began as one mother's fight for justice had exposed a nationwide network of organized discrimination. Lisa, Grace spoke quietly, federal prosecutors want Max's case to be the centerpiece. They're saying his story could change how disability rights cases are handled nationwide. My phone buzzed with updates from Karen Taylor. Wilson just tried to call another emergency meeting. Nobody showed up. They're all talking to investigators instead. Through the office windows, we could see the community gathering. Hundreds of people, many with disabled family members, all united against discrimination. They're trying to spin this in the media, Officer Miller reported, but every statement they make just digs them deeper. Let them talk, Jessica smiled. Every attempt to justify their actions just proves how organized their discrimination was. As afternoon turned to evening, our evidence continued growing. Wilson's network wasn't just being exposed, it was revealing similar operations nationwide. Lisa, Mike O'Connor called, national disability rights organizations want to use this case as a template. They're saying it could help expose discrimination everywhere. Through our surveillance feeds, we watched Wilson's associates scrambling. Banks were freezing accounts, partners were distancing themselves, and their entire operation was unraveling. It's not just about money anymore, Grace observed. Every person they hurt, every life they affected, it's all coming out now. The battle for justice had reached its decisive moment. Wilson's group had thought they were invincible, protected by their wealth and connections. Instead, they were learning why you never underestimate a mother fighting for her child's rights. Because sometimes the biggest mistake isn't the crime you commit, it's assuming your victims won't fight back. The real impact was just beginning, and Riverside Heights would never be the same. The community had found its voice, and discrimination would no longer hide in plain sight. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon against prejudice isn't force or fear. It's the courage to stand up and say, enough. And Wilson was about to learn just how powerful that courage could be. As night fell, we weren't just fighting one case of discrimination anymore. We were exposing a system that had preyed on vulnerable people for profit and showing communities everywhere how to fight back. The battle wasn't over, but the tide had turned. And somewhere in Riverside Heights, a boy in a wheelchair had shown everyone that sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who attack. They're the ones who inspire others to stand up for what's right. Evening descended over Riverside Heights as Wilson's discrimination empire continued to crumble. I stood in Jessica White's command center, watching multiple screens as years of organized prejudice unraveled in real time. Lisa, Officer Miller, called urgently. Wilson just tried to leave town. State police intercepted her at the airport. She was carrying documents, evidence she tried to destroy, but we already have copies. Quick pause. If you're invested in this story, hit subscribe because tomorrow's update shows exactly how justice finally comes for everyone involved, and you won't want to miss it. Through our surveillance network, we watched as more of Wilson's associates turned themselves in. The federal investigation had sparked a race to cooperate. Grace Sullivan burst through the door with her laptop. Breaking news. Wilson's investment firm just got raided by federal agents. They found a hidden room full of documents detailing every family they targeted, every property they devalued through discrimination. My phone buzzed with updates from Steve Murphy. Their backup servers just came online. Everything they tried to delete, we've got it all. Years of coordinated harassment, all documented. Dr. Martinez arrived with devastating evidence. Found proof they were studying medical records. They specifically targeted families with more severe disabilities, thinking they'd be less likely to fight back. The whole network is collapsing, Karen Taylor reported from her monitoring station. Their private chat groups are in chaos. Everyone's trying to save themselves. Through the office windows, we could see more news vans arriving. The story had gone beyond discrimination. It was now about organized criminal enterprise. Lisa, Mike O'Connor called from his desk. National civil rights leaders are flying in. They're saying this case could rewrite disability protection laws. Robert Thompson's text revealed more. Their real estate documents just went public. Every property they acquired after harassing disabled residents, the pattern is undeniable. Jessica White spread new files across her desk. Federal prosecutors just upgraded the charges. They're treating this as organized crime now. Systematic discrimination for financial gain. Amy Brooks rushed in with her laptop. School board released everything. Recordings, emails, meeting minutes. Wilson's group had plans to make entire districts disability unfriendly. Officer Miller's radio crackled with updates. Police units were responding to multiple locations as Wilson's associates tried desperately to cover their tracks. Everything they're trying to hide we already have, Grace observed, monitoring the feeds. Every discriminatory action, every financial deal, all preserved. My phone lit up with a message from Emily Chen. Max is watching the news coverage. Says he feels proud that his story is helping other disabled kids. Laura Phillips reported unprecedented social media momentum. The story had gone viral, with similar cases being exposed nationwide. Federal task force is expanding again, Officer Miller announced. They've found links to discriminatory practices in 5 states now. This is becoming a landmark case. Jack Parker arrived with more community center evidence, found their entire playbook, how they blocked accessibility projects, how they coordinated harassment. It's all here. Through our surveillance network, we watched as more federal agents arrived. Wilson's operation wasn't just being exposed, it was being dismantled piece by piece. Lisa, Jessica called urgently. "Wilson's former partners are all talking now. They're revealing operations we didn't even know about." Mark Reynolds burst in with city records. Every development project, every zoning change, it was all part of their plan to exclude disabled residents. Steve Murphy's voice came through our secure channel. "Their entire digital infrastructure is compromised. Years of discriminatory practices, all exposed." The evidence wasn't just mounting, it was overwhelming. What started as one mother's fight for justice had exposed a nationwide network of organized discrimination. "Lisa," Grace spoke quietly, "federal prosecutors want to use Max's case as a precedent. They're saying it could strengthen disability rights protection nationwide." My phone buzzed with updates from Karen Taylor. "Wilson's trying to claim ignorance now, but her own records prove otherwise. Years of deliberate, organized discrimination." Through the office windows, we could see the community gathering. Hundreds of people united against discrimination, inspired by one boy's courage. "They're attempting damage control," Officer Miller reported, "but every statement they make just confirms their guilt." "Let them try," Jessica smiled. "Every excuse just proves how organized their discrimination was." As evening deepened, our evidence continued growing. Wilson's network wasn't just being exposed, it was revealing similar operations across the country. "Lisa," Mike O'Connor called, "disability rights organizations want to use this case as a model. They're saying it could help fight discrimination everywhere." Through our surveillance feeds, we watched Wilson's world collapse. Banks freezing accounts, partners turning evidence, their entire operation crumbling. "It's about more than money now," Grace observed. "It's about justice for every person they hurt, every life they damaged." The battle had reached its turning point. Wilson's group had thought their money and connections made them untouchable. Instead, they were learning why you never underestimate a mother fighting for justice. Because sometimes the biggest mistake isn't the crime you commit, it's choosing the wrong victim. The impact was spreading beyond Riverside Heights. Communities everywhere were learning how to fight back against discrimination. Because sometimes the most powerful force against prejudice isn't wealth or influence. It's the courage to stand up and expose the truth. And Wilson was learning just how powerful that truth could be. As night settled in, we weren't just fighting one case of discrimination anymore. We were exposing a system that had preyed on vulnerable people for profit and showing others how to fight back. The battle wasn't over, but victory was in sight. And somewhere in Riverside Heights, a boy in a wheelchair had shown everyone that sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who attack. They're the ones who inspire others to stand for what's right. Justice was coming, and discrimination would never again hide in plain sight in Riverside Heights, because sometimes the greatest victories don't come from fighting. They come from exposing the truth and letting justice take its course. The real change was just beginning, and communities everywhere would learn from what happened here, because sometimes the most powerful weapon against discrimination isn't force. It's the courage to stand up and say, "No more." Morning dawned over Riverside Heights with a sense of impending justice. I sat in the federal courthouse, watching as Wilson's discriminatory empire faced its final reckoning. The prosecution was about to present its case, built on months of evidence we'd gathered since that fateful day with the pepper spray. Quick pause. If you're following this story, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's update reveals the final judgment, and you won't want to miss what happens next. "Lisa," Officer Miller whispered, sliding into the seat beside me. "Federal agents just finished their final raid. They found Wilson's private records, detailed plans for discriminating against disabled residents across 5 states. Through our remaining surveillance feeds, we watched as more of Wilson's associates arrived at the courthouse, each accompanied by federal agents. The organization that had once seemed untouchable was now facing justice. Grace Sullivan touched my arm, showing me her laptop. Breaking news. Wilson's investment firm's records are public. Every property they acquired through discrimination, every family they harassed, it's all documented. My phone buzzed with updates from Steve Murphy. Their last backup server just cracked, found evidence of planning meetings dating back 5 years. They called it community purification, systematic removal of disabled residents. Dr. Martinez slipped me a note. Medical evidence is overwhelming. Documented cases of psychological trauma, anxiety attacks, all directly linked to their harassment campaign. The whole network is exposed, Karen Taylor reported quietly from behind us. Their private communications reveal everything. They were planning to expand operations to 20 more cities. Through the courthouse windows, we could see crowds gathering. Families with disabled members, community supporters, media, all waiting to witness justice. "Lisa," Mike O'Connor called softly from the press section, "disability rights organizations are calling this a landmark case. They're saying it will change how discrimination cases are handled nationwide." Jessica White, our attorney, spread case files on the table before us. Federal prosecutors have everything: financial records, harassment documentation, property, schemes. Their entire operation exposed. Amy Brooks arrived with last-minute evidence. School district just released their full investigation. Wilson's group had systematic plans to make schools hostile to disabled students. Officer Miller's radio quietly crackled with updates. Police units were stationed around the city, ensuring Wilson's remaining associates couldn't interfere with justice. "Every piece of evidence is secure," Grace confirmed, monitoring her tablet. "Every discriminatory action, every financial transaction, all preserved and documented." My phone lit up with a message from Emily Chen. "Max is ready to testify, says he wants to help make sure no other kids face what he did." Laura Phillips reported from social media. The hashtag #JusticeForMax had evolved into a national movement against disability discrimination. Federal task force has expanded to 12 states, Officer Miller murmured. "They're finding similar operations everywhere. This case is breaking it all open." Jack Parker passed me new community center documents. Found their entire discrimination playbook, how they targeted families, how they coordinated harassment, all exposed. Through our network, we watched as more witnesses arrived. Former members of Wilson's group turned evidence to save themselves, ready to testify about years of organized discrimination. "Lisa," Jessica whispered urgently, "Wilson's trying to make a deal, but prosecutors want to make an example. This case could deter similar operations nationwide." Mark Reynolds arrived with city council records. Every blocked accessibility project, every denied permit, it was all part of their systematic discrimination plan. Steve Murphy's voice came. "Through my earpiece, their entire financial network is exposed. Years of profit from discrimination, all traced and documented. The evidence wasn't just strong, it was overwhelming. What began as one mother's fight for justice after a pepper spray attack had exposed systematic discrimination nationwide." "Lisa," Grace spoke softly, "federal prosecutors are using Max's case as the cornerstone. They're saying his courage exposed a national network of discrimination." Through the courthouse windows, we could see more supporters arriving. The community that had once been silent in the face of discrimination was now united against it. "They're trying last-minute legal maneuvers," Officer Miller reported. "But their own evidence condemns them." "Let them try," Jessica smiled confidently. "Every motion they filed just proves how organized their discrimination was." As the judge entered the courtroom, our years of evidence were ready. Wilson's network wasn't just facing justice, it was being exposed as a template for fighting discrimination everywhere. "Lisa," Mike O'Connor whispered, "civil rights organizations want to use this case as a model. They're saying it could help expose discrimination nationwide." Through our feeds, we watched Wilson enter the courtroom. The woman who had once seemed so powerful now looked small, faced with the consequences of her actions. "This is about more than punishment," Grace observed quietly. "It's about changing how society handles disability discrimination." The battle had reached its final phase. Wilson's group had thought their money and connections made them invincible. Instead, they were learning why you never underestimate a mother fighting for justice. Because sometimes the biggest mistake isn't the crime you commit. It's assuming your victims won't fight back. The impact would reach far beyond Riverside Heights. Communities everywhere would learn how to fight systematic discrimination. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon against prejudice isn't wealth or influence. It's the courage to expose the truth. And Wilson was about to learn just how powerful that truth could be. As the trial began, we weren't just seeking justice for one pepper spray attack. We were exposing a system that had preyed on vulnerable people for profit and showing others how to fight back. The battle was reaching its conclusion, but its impact was just beginning. And somewhere in the courthouse, a boy in a wheelchair was showing everyone that sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who attack. They're the ones who inspire others to stand for what's right. Justice was about to be served, and discrimination would never again hide in plain sight. Because sometimes the greatest victories don't come from fighting. They come from exposing the truth and letting justice take its course. The real change was just beginning, and communities everywhere would learn from what happened here. Because sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't force, it's the courage to stand up and say enough. And Wilson was about to learn just how powerful that courage could be. The federal courthouse buzzed with tension as Wilson's trial entered its final phase. After weeks of testimony and mountains of evidence, justice was finally within reach. I sat in the front row, watching as the last pieces of her discriminatory empire crumbled. Quick pause. If you're following this story, hit subscribe because tomorrow's update brings everything to a close and you won't want to miss the final judgment. "Lisa," Officer Miller leaned in, speaking quietly. "Wilson's last remaining allies just turned state's evidence. They're testifying about discrimination operations in 3 more states. Through our surveillance network, we watched as more federal agents arrived, carrying boxes of newly discovered evidence. The case had grown far beyond our initial investigation. Grace Sullivan showed me her laptop screen. Breaking news. Treasury Department just froze all assets connected to Wilson's investment firm. They've traced millions in profits directly to discriminatory practices. My phone buzzed with updates from Steve Murphy. Final analysis of their servers complete. Found detailed plans for expanding their discrimination network to 30 more cities. They were planning to go national. Dr. Martinez passed me her final report. Documented psychological impact on over 100 disabled residents. Evidence shows their harassment campaign was scientifically designed to cause maximum distress. The entire network is exposed, Karen, Taylor whispered from behind. Their internal communications reveal planning sessions dating back 7 years. They called it community cleansing. Through the courthouse windows, we could see crowds growing. Media trucks, disability rights, activists and supporters from across the country all gathered to witness the conclusion. "Lisa," Mike O'Connor approached quietly, "civil rights organizations are already using this case to push for stronger disability protection laws. They're calling it the Max Effect." Jessica White arranged her final arguments. "We've got everything. Those financial records, harassment documentation, property schemes, internal communications, their whole operation laid bare." Amy Brooks arrived with last-minute evidence. School district investigations revealed similar operations in 12 other states. They were systematically making schools hostile to disabled students. Officer Miller's radio hummed with updates. Police units had secured the courthouse, ensuring Wilson's remaining supporters couldn't interfere with justice. Every piece of evidence is catalogued, Grace confirmed, checking her tablet. Every discriminatory action, every financial transaction, every planning meeting, all preserved and verified. My phone lit up with a message from Emily Chen. Max wants you to know he's proud. Says if his story helps other disabled kids, then something good came from that day. Laura Phillips monitored social media. The case had sparked a national conversation about disability rights and systematic discrimination. Federal task force has expanded nationwide, Officer Miller reported. They're finding similar operations everywhere. This case broke open the whole network. Jack Parker delivered final community center documents, found proof they were planning to replicate their discrimination model across the country, called it community standardization. Through our network, we watched as Wilson entered the courthouse. The woman who had once wielded pepper spray against my disabled son now faced the full force of federal justice. "Lisa," Jessica whispered urgently, "prosecutors are using this case as a template. They're saying it could change how discrimination is prosecuted nationwide." Mark Reynolds arrived with final city records. Every denied permit, every blocked improvement. It was all part of a calculated plan to drive out disabled residents. Steve Murphy's voice came through my earpiece. Their entire financial empire is exposed. Years of profiting from discrimination, all documented and traced. The evidence wasn't just conclusive, it was transformative. What began as one mother's fight for justice had exposed systematic discrimination across America. "Lisa," Grace spoke softly, "civil rights leaders are calling this a turning point. They're saying Max's case could strengthen disability protection nationwide." Through the courthouse windows, we could see more supporters arriving. The community that had once turned a blind eye to discrimination was now united against it. "They're making final appeals," Officer Miller reported, "but their own evidence condemns them." "Let them try," Jessica smiled confidently. "Every motion just proves how organized their discrimination was." As the final arguments began, our years of evidence stood ready. Wilson's network wasn't just facing justice, it was becoming a case study in fighting discrimination. "Lisa," Mike O'Connor whispered, "disability rights organizations want to use this case as a model. They're saying it could help expose discrimination everywhere." Through our feeds, we watched Wilson face the judge. The woman who had attacked my son with pepper spray now faced the consequences of years of organized discrimination. "This is about more than one case," Grace observed quietly. "It's about changing how society handles disability discrimination." The battle had reached its climax. Wilson's group had thought their money and connections made them untouchable. Instead, they were learning why you never underestimate a mother fighting for justice. Because sometimes the biggest mistake isn't the crime you commit. It's choosing the wrong victim. The impact would reach far beyond our courthouse. Communities everywhere would learn how to fight systematic discrimination. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon against prejudice isn't wealth or influence. It's the courage to expose the truth. And Wilson was about to learn just how powerful that truth could be. As the final testimony concluded, we weren't just seeking justice for one pepper spray attack. We were exposing a system that had preyed on vulnerable people for profit and showing others how to fight back. The battle was ending, but its impact was just beginning. And somewhere in the courthouse, a boy in a wheelchair was showing everyone that sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who attack, They're the ones who inspire others to stand for what's right. Justice was about to be served, and discrimination would never again hide in plain sight, because sometimes the greatest victories don't come from fighting. They come from exposing the truth and letting justice take its course. The real change was just beginning, and communities everywhere would learn from what happened here, because sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't force. It's the courage to stand up and say, "No more." And as the judge prepared to deliver the final verdict, Wilson was about to learn just how powerful that courage could be. The federal courthouse fell silent as the judge prepared to deliver the final verdict. Months of investigation, mountains of evidence, and countless testimonies had led to this moment. I sat with Max beside me, his wheelchair positioned proudly in the front row, watching as justice finally arrived. Quick pause. If you followed this incredible journey, make sure to hit subscribe, because there are more amazing stories of justice coming your way tomorrow. The court finds the defendants guilty on all counts. The judge's voice rang clear and firm. Systematic discrimination, civil rights violations, conspiracy to commit fraud, and organized harassment of disabled individuals. Through our surveillance, feeds, we watched as federal agents moved simultaneously across multiple states, dismantling what remained of Wilson's discrimination network. Grace Sullivan showed me her tablet. Breaking news: Justice Department announces nationwide investigation into similar discrimination operations. They're using our case as the template. My phone buzzed with updates from Steve Murphy. Final tallies coming in. The discrimination network affected over 5,000 disabled residents across 12 states. Every victim will receive restitution. Dr. Martinez passed me her final statistics. Over 300 families will receive compensation for medical and psychological trauma caused by their targeted harassment campaign. "It's really over," Karen Taylor whispered from behind us. Their entire network exposed and dismantled. They're calling it the largest disability rights victory in decades. Through the courthouse windows, we could see crowds cheering. The community that had once been silent in the face of discrimination was now celebrating its end. Lisa, Mike, O'Connor approached quietly. Civil rights organizations are already implementing new protection programs based on what we uncovered. They're calling it the Max Protocol. Jessica White organized her final documents. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, every financial record, it's all becoming part of a national database to fight discrimination. Amy Brooks arrived with news from other communities. Similar cases are being filed nationwide. People are using our investigation as a guide to expose discrimination in their own towns. Officer Miller's radio hummed with updates. Similar operations were being uncovered and shut down across the country. "The impact is spreading," Grace confirmed, checking reports. Communities everywhere are learning how to identify and fight systematic discrimination. My phone lit up with a message from Emily Chen. Max's story is being added to the school curriculum. They're teaching kids how to stand up against discrimination. Laura Phillips monitored the national response. Our case had become a symbol of hope for disabled communities everywhere. "Federal task force is expanding," Officer Miller reported. "They're creating specialized units to investigate disability discrimination nationwide." Jack Parker delivered community center updates. Every blocked accessibility project is being reviewed. They're fast-tracking improvements that Wilson's group tried to stop. Through our network, we watched as Wilson was led away. The woman who had pepper-sprayed my son now faced years in federal prison, her discrimination empire in ruins. "Lisa," Jessica spoke softly, "this case has changed everything. Communities everywhere will use it to fight discrimination." Mark Reynolds arrived with City Council news. Every discriminatory policy is being reversed. "We're becoming a model for accessible community development." Steve Murphy's voice came through one last time. Their entire system is exposed. No one can use their playbook for discrimination again. The victory wasn't just complete, it was transformative. What began as one mother's fight for justice had become a national movement against discrimination. Lisa, Grace smiled warmly, civil rights leaders are implementing new protection strategies based on our investigation. Your fight is helping disabled people everywhere. Through the courthouse windows, we could see Riverside Heights transforming. The community that had faced down discrimination was becoming a beacon of hope. It's more than justice, Officer Miller observed. It's real change. Change that will last, Jessica agreed. Because we didn't just win a case, we exposed a system. As we left the courthouse, our years of effort had paid off. Wilson's network wasn't just defeated, it had become a lesson in fighting discrimination everywhere. Mom, Max spoke up, his voice strong. We did it, not just for me, but for everyone. The battle was over, but its impact was just beginning. Communities everywhere would learn from what happened in Riverside Heights, because sometimes the most powerful weapon against discrimination isn't force or fear. It's the courage to stand up and expose the truth. And as we walked out of the courthouse together, Max rolling proudly beside me, we knew that discrimination would never again go unchallenged in our community. The real victory wasn't just in the verdict. It was in showing others how to fight back, because sometimes the strongest response to hate isn't more hate. It's standing together against injustice. As news of the verdict spread, messages poured in from across the country. Other communities were already using our investigation as a guide to expose discrimination in their own towns. The impact would ripple outward, touching lives we'd never meet. Because sometimes the greatest victories aren't just about winning, they're about changing how people fight injustice. Max looked up at me as we headed home, his smile bright and determined. Mom, he said, do you think other kids will be safer now? Yes, buddy, I replied, knowing it was true. Because you showed everyone that sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who attack, they're the ones who inspire others to stand up for what's right. As we left the courthouse that day, we weren't just celebrating a legal victory, we were witnessing the beginning of real change. Because sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't revenge, it's showing others how to fight back with truth and justice. And somewhere in Riverside Heights, a boy in a wheelchair had taught an entire nation that lesson. If you've been moved by this story, remember to subscribe, because there are more stories of justice, courage, and triumph coming your way. Together, we can make sure that discrimination never again hides in plain sight. Because sometimes the greatest change starts with one person brave enough to say no more. And that's how justice really works. Not just in victories, but in showing others how to win their own battles against discrimination. 6 months after the landmark verdict that brought down Wilson's discrimination empire, Riverside Heights had transformed in ways none of us could have predicted. I stood in the renovated community center, watching Max lead a youth advocacy group for disabled rights. If you've been following our story, hit subscribe, because there are more inspiring stories of justice coming your way tomorrow. The center that Wilson's group had tried so hard to keep inaccessible was now a model of inclusive design. Every improvement they'd blocked had been fast-tracked, creating a space where everyone could thrive. Lisa, Officer Miller called out. As he entered, just got the final numbers from the federal task force. 23 similar discrimination networks exposed nationwide, all using the template from our investigation. Through the center's windows, I could see construction crews working on the shopping plaza. Every store was being retrofitted with enhanced accessibility features, funded by assets seized from Wilson's organization. Grace Sullivan approached with her tablet. The Max protocol is being implemented in communities across the country. They're using our documentation methods to identify and fight discrimination everywhere. My phone buzzed with updates from Steve Murphy. Final tally, over 10,000 disabled residents nationwide have received compensation from our case. The ripple effect keeps growing. Dr. Martinez joined us, her smile bright. The psychological impact is remarkable. Disabled residents report feeling more empowered, more included. The fear is gone. "Look at this," Karen Taylor called from her monitoring station. Every screen showed similar transformations happening in other communities, all inspired by our victory. The local news crew, led by Mike O'Connor, was filming a documentary about the changes. Communities everywhere are learning from Riverside Heights, he explained. You've created a blueprint for fighting discrimination. Robert Thompson's store had become a training center, teaching other businesses how to create truly accessible spaces. It's not just about ramps and wider aisles, he explained to a group of visiting merchants. It's about creating welcome. Emily Chen was developing a school curriculum based on our case, teaching students about disability rights and the importance of standing together against discrimination. "Mom," Max called from his group session, "we're organizing a national conference. Kids like me teaching others how to fight for their rights." Laura Phillips reported unprecedented engagement on social media. The hashtag #LearnMaxEffect was being used to document accessibility improvements worldwide. "The change is permanent," Jessica White observed, watching the community transform. They didn't just lose a court case. They lost the ability to hide discrimination in plain sight. This Jack Parker showed me the community center's new programs. Every activity was designed to be inclusive, ensuring no one would ever feel unwelcome again. Through our old surveillance networks, now converted to security systems, protecting accessible spaces, we watched Riverside Heights become what it always should have been, a community for everyone. "Lisa," Grace spoke softly, "other parents are using your documentation methods. They're exposing discrimination in their own communities, fighting back just like we did." Mark Reynolds brought news from the City Council. Every development project now required extensive accessibility reviews, ensuring discrimination could never again hide behind building codes. The impact wasn't just local, it was spreading. Communities everywhere were learning that standing together against discrimination wasn't just right, it was possible. "The real victory," Officer Miller observed, "isn't just what we stopped, it's what we started." Because sometimes the most powerful change isn't in winning one battle, it's in showing others how to fight their own. And somewhere in Riverside Heights, a boy who faced down hatred with courage had become a symbol of hope for disabled children everywhere. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. Because there are more tales of justice, courage, and transformation waiting to be told. Up next, we've got 2 more remarkable stories that'll show you just how powerful standing up for what's right can be. Just click to watch, and remember, every subscription helps us share more stories of triumph over discrimination. Together, we've shown that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in fighting back, it's in standing together and saying no more. And that's a lesson Riverside Heights will never forget. The real epilogue isn't just in what changed, it's in what can never go back to the way it was. Because sometimes the most powerful victory isn't in defeating one enemy, it's in showing everyone how to stand up against injustice. And that's the true legacy of what happened when one mother and her brave son decided to fight back against discrimination. They showed the world that change isn't just possible, it's inevitable when people stand together for what's right. Next up, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.